how to prioritize self-care in your life and what that has looked like for you as you've dealt with this, because you've had some time where you were misdiagnosed, and you've had some hospital times in there, then a correct diagnosis. I mean, it's been a journey. So what role has self-care played in that for you?
Yeah. So, starting from, literally like 16 years old, was diagnosed with depression. Then from there, had a lot of different medications, and just nothing really seemed to be a solution. But at the same time, I was not prioritizing self-care. I didn't even know what that was. I didn't really know what it looked like. I was just trying to really get through the day and really run away from anything and just kind of facing that. So that was like 16. Then 19 years old was when I was hospitalized. So hospitalized, diagnosed with bipolar 1, court-ordered treatment, SMI, which stands for severely mentally ill, the SMI diagnosis.
Wow.
And that was 19 years old, literally December 22nd of 2014 through like January 5th. So those 2 weeks. And then from there, went back to school, and I was still in school at the time, but I went back, and graduated when I was 22, I ended up going back and working at the same exact place where I was a patient at. So I was on both ends. And that's really what that's really where the name Crooked Illness came from for the memoir, because I didn't know what to call the podcast. Well, I started the podcast in February of 2020, and, I'm 27 years old now. So this was literally all the way from like 15 years old to 27. So 12 years, right? So all those events in between. And I really started to prioritize self-care probably about really 4 years ago. So 23 is getting into, okay, that's when I got introduced to, I was invited by some old friends from high school, come to this, there's this conference going on, personal development. I was like, I didn't know what that is. I don't know I don't know what any of this stuff means. So that's when I went, and I got, I was meeting the speakers, and I was really amazed to see people getting up on stage and talking about, I used to be homeless and I struggle with addiction, and I started this company, and it really started. That's when the first seed started to plant in me that, okay, I'm obviously not happy with my situation, and, having a lot of struggles with, like sexual trauma, abuse from childhood, just a lot of things that I struggle with relationship wise, whether it's family and then just like personal relationships, and really having really toxic patterns that I carried with me. So for me, what starting to prioritize self-care looks like is, I really have developed cutting things out. And I took out a piece of paper, and I literally would write down like, okay, what am I doing with my time? What am I working out? Like, what am I doing with my diet? Am I drinking water? What am I consuming? What kind of shows am I watching? What things am I listening to? What are my relationships? Really getting a clear visual of, here's my relationships. And then here's what comes up that causes, overwhelm, stress, maybe a lot of fighting. So I had to cut out a lot of, people that I've known for a number of years, because a big thing I would do, which was, cutting out a lot of drinking, because I used to do a lot when I was younger, but, now it's like, not that I still don't ever drink at all. I'll drink like once or twice a week, but it used to be like 5 days a week. And it was like, just excessive. And then, deciding I'm not going to do that anymore. I want to start getting back into, I want to start reading books again. I used to read when I was younger. Let me read. And I never read memoirs or people's stories or anything like that. So I started reading like 50 books a year and like listening to podcasts, and then, putting myself out there, and it's changing the way that I saw the world, because I would walk into a room and I would think, okay, people are judging me. They're looking at me. Something's wrong with me. They think I'm stupid. They think I'm like weird. And I would that was my perception. And it was always negative, and then negative towards myself. So I really started to change it, and instead go in and just want to get to know people, want to introduce myself, and really see what value that I can bring instead of just jumping right to that. And then that was a big part of it. So really just starting super small was what I did.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're starting super small. Sometimes these things don't require gigantic steps. You just got to start somewhere, and then you kind of have to figure it out as you go, because self-care looks different for everybody. So you kind of have to figure out what works for you. So I'm glad you talked about the starting small, because I think that's really important. And this leads nicely into confidently setting boundaries. You talked about the fact that there were some relationships that had to not exist in the same way in your life anymore. And so I would have to think boundaries work definitely comes into play here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was like always a really hard thing for me to say no. Like, that at that time in my life, I remember I was working 2 jobs. I was in school, and a lot of it, that was before that I was actually diagnosed with bipolar, when I was hospitalized. But I remember even my psychiatrist was like, no, like you can't possibly, have this, because you're getting straight A's, you're working, you're able to keep a job, you have 2 of them, you have this relationship. But I'm like, we're fighting all the time, like arguing like with each other, just all this stuff, and just constantly chaotic at home, with like fighting every single day with my mom, and like feeling like outcasted, with like not fit, like with my sisters, and like not really like fitting in that place or having anyone that I could open up to. And then really just a lot of my friendships was, let's go out, let's party, let's drink, let's meet these guys, let's, do all this stuff. And it was just really running away. That's really what it was. So I remember just really feeling like to set the boundary. I remember even when I first came home from the hospital, I still had to really go through my phone and see all these messages from, different guys who I was talking to, or like had some kind of relationships with, but I was never valuing myself to really, and that's the thing that I really, if I hadn't been able to do that, I would have never met my fiance, who I'm getting married to in like less than 3 months. The wedding is. So
congratulations.
Thank you. So I wouldn't have that relationship, because I would still have those same patterns.
Yeah.
That I carried, that I really was able to start to see it. So I was like, okay, I was treated this way. I was abused this way in relationships. So I started to become that way in other relationships, and I needed to address it. So, and just saying, I don't want to do these things anymore. And I remember starting the podcast, and that's when I had people that I thought were like friends, who were like, I was like, hey, would you listen to this and let me know? And they're like, I don't want to hear this. Like, I don't even like really care about this. And like, I remember being literally having, he was my boyfriend at the time, fiance, was like, well, this is supposed to be like, these people are supposed to be your friends. And they say that. And that's when I was like, yeah, you're right. And I kind of like and that's when I said, I remember just blocking everybody and just cutting them off everything, and have just not seeing them anymore, not having any more conversations. And then that I feel like really made a difference, because I didn't have those influences, to tell me that, okay, this is stupid. And then I probably would have just been like, yeah, you're right. This is stupid. Like, why am I trying to do this podcast? This is dumb. But, getting around people who have worked on themselves and have done the work, and they're passionate, they're supportive, they're positive. That's all I have now in my life. I don't have, I've definitely had relationships that I set boundaries, and I'll still, not be as close to these people, but, I won't go like how I used to be, where I would just block everybody and do that. And sometimes, I would have in the past, I would just do that, but really just being able to tell people like, hey, this is how I'm feeling. Like, and I know if you might not agree, but we can this is just being able to express yourself that way and share how it is, and not have to go. Cause I would always react. I always had to I always had to prove a point. Like, they need to know that this is wrong. And I need to and I would yell, and it would then of course they would yell back. So I learned how to communicate myself, and really understanding what's worth it and what's not. And then really prioritizing myself, because when I have so much of that happening, I start to take that out towards other people, and then really it ruins my whole day. I sit with it for hours and hours and the whole day. And now when things like this happen, obviously it still impacts me, maybe for not anywhere near where it was the entire day of just being super, super debilitated by it. But that's really what the important part is just, recognizing, for me, I'm a visual person. So writing it out, here's what's stressful. Maybe it's something at work, maybe you're in a job of, cause what I really do do for work too is working in sales and tech sales, helping healthcare companies with their, online presence. And I love it. Right. But, obviously, you hit your quota, you have to hit your numbers, you want to go over and do, achieve all this stuff, which I do, but then to also not give yourself credit and not celebrate yourself for what you're accomplishing. And you're constantly like, it's not good enough. I need to do this. I need to do more. I need to do this. So really listing on paper, what are the things in your life? Do you have a relationship with, maybe it's your dad or your sister or your mom, where you're constantly butting heads and arguing and it's really triggering for you? Write it down so you can see it. Yeah. And then start to figure out, okay, how can I get around this? And how can I make this better? And what can I do? That's really what it comes down to for me.
Yeah. And what can you do? And also, I think within that, because I'm nodding my head vigorously, she's saying these things because I've had to kind of navigate some of these things myself with relationships in my life. At some point you can't change other people and you can't make them hear what they're not ready to hear. If they haven't done, it's very hard for people that aren't doing healing work to understand or hear from people who are. That is what I have learned. And so you get to a point and I'm the over-explaining champion of the world, because I'm like, if I just keep explaining it, they'll get it. And that's just not always the case. And so also realizing this is where I am. This is what is healthiest for me. This is what I've learned. These are the kind of environments that feel safe for me. If that's something you can participate in and be curious about and be supportive of, great. If it's not, then I may have to love you from a distance, and that's okay too. And I think be feeling empowered to do that.
Yeah. And I really love that, you bring that up of being able to do it from a distance and really getting into these difficult relationships, because now, doing that has really taught me how to manage things in a ways that I never used to be able to in the past. Having a relationship up where this is really hard and I just want to I don't want to do it. I don't want to deal with it now, knowing how to deal with that and handle it, when before it was always react, and it was because I never got clear on these things. I never laid it out. I never, did the work to really see the patterns. And now that I see, okay, here's patterns that I've had in the past, and here's things that I bring up, or, this is how, when I notice myself feeling a certain way, or when I'm when I'm doing really well at what I'm doing, and then I'm still nothing seems to be enough. Or, even if you have things that are coming up in your life that are really exciting, there's there's always going to be changes. You still need to take care of yourself, because what it comes down to is you can't skip a day. You're never allowed to okay, I'm just going to not do it, even if it's one little thing a day for yourself. And really something that's helped me is just getting into gratitude. So I have some apps on my phone where, I had a journal that I made, but there's an app I go on where every morning I go on and I say, I'm grateful for this. What would make today great? Here's a daily affirmation. And then what are some amazing things that happened? And then writing things out, and just even taking out a journal that I have and just writing, here's my thoughts, so I can go back and read them and say, wow, here's how I was feeling and thinking, and this is what's going on, to really get clear on it. So that's really what it comes down to, is it's very hard to do the work when you're not clear on what needs to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. Identifying that. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Taking care of our emotional health as much as our physical health. I think you would probably agree with me that those things are connected if you're not, so talk to me about how some practices you have in place. You mentioned some already that tie nicely into this that you do to help this, but are there any other practices that you do to make sure that those things are in sync with each other?
Yeah. So I really do agree with you. That's so funny that you asked that question, because that was the first episode of my podcast. It was literally the relationship between physical and mental health. And I talked about that because that's kind of what I was starting to get into and learn about. But really for me, it does make a lot of sense, because when I think back to when I was struggling and doing my worst, I wasn't taking care of my body. I wasn't even paying attention to it. I didn't think about it at all. I would just get up and go on repeat. But what I really noticed is, making the changes, cutting out all of this the alcohol, getting into, buying a big water bottle, like drinking more water and, eating different meals, learning how to cook, eating balanced meals, not going out. And I cut out the different, fast food stuff that I used to. I still eat, I still go, I love burgers. I had some sliders today. I'm not like extreme with it.
Sure. Moderation.
Yeah. So see, that's kind of what it is too. And then getting into, again, going back to working out, getting into running again, because I used to run when I was younger and then stopped doing that, getting into cold plunge, cold exposure. Cause I hate the cold. I won't do it. And I realized it's a mental thing. So when I could finally get into the water and stay in there for 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and then really feel the effects of that on just like your muscles, and then feeling like I accomplished this. Like I did, even if I did a walk, I went outside and I walked today, or I sat down and I did a 5-minute meditation in the morning, because before it was very difficult for me to sit still, for me to like just sit there. I'm like, how do people do this? I'm like, I can't even sit down and thoughts are interrupted. So just starting with that. And that's really what I've really noticed, because, even now, with getting over having a cold and, a lot of stuff going on with the holidays, not really, and then just coming back from a wedding. So really not having been consistent in the gym for almost over a month, when we usually go like at least four times a week. Right. But not being hard on myself for it, and not sitting here and beating myself up. Oh, I'm not doing I'm still doing things, I'm cutting down, whether it's cutting down your screen time on your phone, like just making some kind of goal, and then, figuring out, the progress towards it. And that's really a big thing for me, is the way that I speak to myself in the process of doing this work. So I love that you bring up the balance between like your physical health and then how that impacts your mental health. Because, for me, like really just, I live completely different from how I used to. I don't go out and like stay up all night anymore. I used to stay up till like 4. Sometimes I wouldn't even sleep. I'd stay up all day.
Wow.
And then, so see, it's like, I don't do that anymore. It's like, now I go to bed. It's like, I'll go to bed at like 10:30 or like sometimes 10 or like 11, it's not like I was always, at least my early was midnight. That used to be early for me.
Wow.
So like completely changing my sleep cycle.
Yeah.
Just my meals, like what you're doing with and then also, looking at where you've come from, the work you've done, and celebrating that. So I definitely agree with you. And I've seen that in a lot of people that, I've talked with, who also have a diagnosis of bipolar, can definitely really relate to that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important. I can't stress that enough. If you don't take anything else away from what we do. How can we support ourselves and other women in living unapologetically? And especially those in the community that struggle with this, because I think it's so important. And we'll take not even just women, but people in general that deal with this diagnosis. How can we do that? And how have you been able to do that?
Yeah. So I love that you just laid that out. So are you talking more of how can I support myself or support others?
Both. How do I support myself in living unapologetically? And then how does that transform? Because sometimes it's simple. It's as simple as someone seeing you do that empowers them to do it too.
Yeah. So a big thing for me has really been just staying consistent with understanding what I'm thinking. So like writing it out, like seeing, what is going on in my life right now. Like there's a lot, obviously a lot of changes, right? With, like moving, the wedding coming up, the holidays, like other family members moving in, like, planning for like honeymoon, like there's like a lot of different changes, in a short amount of time, with, especially when you kind of break it down. But that's really what I do, is get clear on that. And then also something else too, is like just consistency with my treatment, my support, the supportive group I built, like I'll call it your support network. So, other people I'm close with who I message who also have bipolar, and being able to build this community, and then talking with, fixing the relationship that I had with my mom. And now, being able to be really close with her, and then both my parents, and just, really understanding that you can, where you are right now in your journey, maybe you're recently diagnosed, maybe you're you're struggling and you think you might have maybe something with bipolar or some kind of mental illness or something you're not sure with. But there's so many things I told myself that I would never have, that would never happen, and I made it a reality because I did that. Yeah. I said, you can't have this. You're never going to have a good relationship with your mom. You're never going to be able to keep a job, right? You're never going to be able to be successful. You're never going to be able to all of these things. And I wasn't for so long because I told myself, and then once you start to change the language, you really do open up those doors. So that's what I would say for people with, to support through that, is to really look at your life and say, okay, here's what I want to do, or here's how I am right now. Here's what I would like to change. And then even if you don't believe it, write it down. Why do you want this? Or what do you think that would do for you? Cause I know even with, even if it's like you're sitting and you're like, oh, I want to maybe find something that works for me with medication. Maybe you're having a really hard time with finding, medication that works for you, or, other, struggling with that, with people saying, okay, don't take any medication, or, go off your medicine, or whatever, whatever you're struggling with, right? Really figure out, get down deep into where it's coming from and really get clear on it. So, because that's the thing, is you can really achieve what you're wanting to, but you don't have to beat yourself up in the process and say, continue to keep it a reality that it's going to continue. You're never going to have these things. You're never going to be able to accomplish them because, you really do bring a lot of value just with your experiences, because, that's the thing, is me talking to other people who also have a diagnosis of bipolar. And then, if they have a book, like reading their book, or like listening to, if they have a podcast too, listening to that, or maybe even, just learning from them, here's something that I'm really dealing with right now. And like, what can we do to help each other?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say just you having the podcast and the book itself is so empowering for other people, and so supportive, and how you can live and how to navigate this. The importance of setting and coming back to your why / your values in everything you do and the choices that you make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So coming back to my why and the choices. So basically for me, the why of, live well bipolar, sharing about my experiences with it is because this is something that I wish that I had when I was diagnosed at 19. I wish I didn't the way I used social media before was really I never did any research. I never looked up, okay, other people with depression, bipolar, anxiety, nothing. It was always, what am I wearing, or like, what am I eating, or like, what kind of songs. It was never any of that. So really that goes back to my why of, this would have made a difference for me if I saw someone else, maybe like a similar age to me, like, oh, wow, like, look at this guy, or look at this girl, or look at this woman, like she did this and she wrote a book about it. I'm going to read it. She has the podcast about it. Like, that would have made me be curious as to like, okay, well, how are they able to do that? Maybe I can, maybe I can change. That's my why of wanting to share this, because I don't live with the stigma that I put on my own self anymore. Because even now, like even at where at work, I remember people, opening up to me and messaging me and saying, wow, like, I didn't know, and I don't really go around and say, people have, I think someone stopped me in the hallway one time or a couple times, like walked around and like, you have a podcast, or what is it? And I used to be afraid, like, I don't want to say it. I don't want to talk because I'm like afraid of, if I say that, then like they might look at me different because it's not really like a common thing you see. So that's really why I do it, because now people are like, wow, like I'm on this medication, or I was diagnosed with this, or, my mom has bipolar, or my dad, was diagnosed with bipolar. And that's really cool that you're so open and you want to talk about it. And then just also hearing other people share. And that's what the thing is, I don't hold the judgment that I used to, because I feel like when people would react a certain way, I would be like, okay, it's because they don't like me, or I did something wrong. But you don't know, maybe they've had an experience where they lost somebody associated with bipolar, where they lost a family member. And then for me bringing this up could be triggering for them. So I don't have any kind of, the way that I used to about it. I'm very open, and like, if people want to continue to talk about it, I will, but if they don't, I have no problem like changing the subject. So yeah, it's just really getting over yourself. I was the obstacle. Like, no, don't do it. Don't talk about it. Don't share it. But it's helped more people than it's hurt.
Absolutely. I mean, I will tell you, I shared your podcast with a friend that deals with bipolar 1 and depression the other day. I'm like, I think you'll find this really helpful because you had so many experiences that she's had. It does make a difference. And that's such an important why. And thank you so much for your vulnerability and honesty, because you do I know you're making a difference. Living out of your own expectations versus others. I think this is a very interesting question because we've talked about the stigma that's out there with bipolar and when people hear that you have it. So talk to me about expectations and how you navigate that.
Yeah. So I feel like for me, I would always see expectations from others when it comes to bipolar of, oh, wow, like you have a diagnosis that you're bipolar. Like how, like that's because I feel like the image of it is what we see in TV and on movies.
Yeah.
Super, super extreme, super, super extreme changes and, moods and different things. And that is a reality for many people, but it doesn't always look that way. So that's always what I expected. I'm like, if people hear this about me, they're not going to take me seriously. They might think I don't know what they're going to think, and I would think that because that's how I used to think about my own self. So it's my old voice telling me that, and that was the expectation I put out there. But now the expectation that I have for myself is really just, being really proud of what I've been able to do, and honestly, if it wasn't for me doing this work and, starting the podcast, which would be 3 years and February. So, I mean, if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for publishing the book, I wouldn't be able to have the confidence to speak I was very shy, very, very shy before and very nervous. Like I didn't know what to say or I was always frazzled with that. So I wouldn't be able to do the work that I do now, working with people one-on-one, who live with bipolar and basically coaching them through the experiences they're having now and being that person to be there for them and say, what are you going through right now? What's going on? What are you working on? Let's put together a plan to do this. I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to do that because I would not be open about it. I wouldn't want to talk about it. And I also, and that's the thing is think about all the things you wouldn't be able to do if it wasn't for your diagnosis or maybe the darker parts of your story. You wouldn't be able to encourage other people. And that's really what I see is I wouldn't be able to do, the work I'm doing now, talking to, people, even in my actual job, talking to clients and I'm getting in front of people and, talking about, I wouldn't be able to do it. I'd be too nervous. I'd be too afraid. I'd be super intimidated, going up to you want to talk to C-level executives. You want to walk up to, it's they don't take me seriously. They think I'm like a kid, they're not going to look at me. And then if I'm going to sit here and say, oh, well, I have a diagnosis of bipolar and I talk about it in a show and they're going to be like, but that was always my expectation that I put on them.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's a very good point too. That's a very good point too, when it comes to expectations of that. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was a really great insight there. Accepting the layered aspects of ourselves. I think it can be really hard. I deal with anxiety and OCD diagnosis. So that's my story. And it can be really hard to accept all those layers that led to those things and maybe developing. I'm speaking for myself, but also coming to the realization that this is all a part of who I am. This has made me who I am today in this world. And I learned how to live and function in ways that I wouldn't have, and I don't necessarily subscribe to that. Everything happens for a reason. Sometimes crappy things just happen and they didn't need to, but at this, but at the same time, accepting all of that about ourselves and loving ourselves through that. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, I really love that. Just the way you put that out there of just the images of loving the different layers of yourself, in the different progression, right? So literally with my story of here was this diagnosis and 12 years of this, looking back at myself when I was younger and really, having the appreciation for, the way that I was trying to navigate it, and understanding now of, that's the thing, is really being able to like, it's hard to love yourself when you think you're a failure, or you think that you messed up something, or you think that you're the reason, or it's your fault, or maybe you've been told that, like I have been in previous relationships that were abusive, of this is your fault, or this is what you deserve, or this is why you get treated this way. And then really starting to embody that myself and believe it. And I would think that's a reality. Well, okay, well then if that's how it is, then I'm not going to respect myself, and I don't deserve to be respected either, because it's not going to last. Love isn't real. I'm not worth, overcoming the trauma. How do you even do that? It's never going to happen. And that's when you really get around different environments and different rooms and see people who have lived it and say, wow, like, how did you overcome that? And how are you seem like such an upbeat person now, and really being able to do this? So it's really about asking those questions and staying curious. And
staying curious is so important.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. And it is. And you have to stay curious. And it goes back to that. Who am I surrounding myself with? And how healthy are they? And what kind of voices we're hearing, and what's true about this? Because so many times we think our thoughts and our stories are truth, and being able to pull out what's actually true here versus what I'm being told or I'm telling myself. And you talked about writing, and that's where, writing those things out and getting really clear about all that you are and the journey you've been on, and giving yourself the love and the grace for that. And I think that that's so important as we're looking at these stories and what we've learned and how we've navigated it in embracing all those parts of us. In summary, in Living Out Feel, which is the name of our podcast, Finding Empowerment, Embracing Layers. Talk to me about how you've done that, how that's affected how you feel about yourself, as well as in your relationships.
Yeah. So I would really say, when it comes down to finding empowerment and embracing the layers within myself, and then how it's shown up in my relationship, is really not believing the old stories that I told myself, this is the reality. I'm this, I'm not worth this. Rewriting those and restructuring those, and then getting clear on my thoughts, that's really how I've learned to, really feel that, to really be able to get to the point where I can embrace those layers, to break those old patterns, to have healthy relationships. Because when I literally remember, getting around, the friends that I have now, and feeling like I never had support. I never had a supportive community. I never had, with releasing my book and having, such great group of people around me who, were there for me with, putting together the launch party, helping out with different things, and really sharing their thoughts and talking about the story and opening up to me, and just having people like that around. And then also, getting into, my relationship, with my fiance, getting into, being able to recognize, okay, here's how old patterns were showing up in the past from me being hurt in other relationships, and then just moving to another one, but then still carrying on what I've learned from past relationships from a young age, and thinking this is normal. But then that's what it is when you finally get in front of something that's healthy, it feels foreign to you, because all you know is, and I would be like, okay, well, what's going on? We need to argue about something. You're not mad about this. And then I would want to come up, I would want to sabotage it. I would want to make it a bad thing. And, getting and breaking away from different things that I almost would say, this is my life, really from a young age, being like, okay, well, I guess if I don't value myself and I don't feel that way, then I guess, well, then I'm just going to go this route of, people that I'm meeting online who are saying, well, you should get into adult entertainment industry and, do this for a living and get into, these kind of things. And then really realizing that for me, that showed up so much because of pain. But then, now, not having that perception on people who, do different things like that. I don't know their story or experiences, but I know that is the direction I was going to go down because it was an escape for me. And then really that's what it comes down to is when I think of the embracing layers part and then finding the empowerment. So from being able to find the empowerment is what allowed me to embrace the layers and accept these relationships, because before I would push it away. I would say, no, you're too good of a person. I need to do something to make you want to leave as like a relationship or a friend or whatever. Yeah. And now, not breaking those patterns and saying, I'm not going to continue to do this anymore. I'm not going to speak to people like this. I'm not going to treat people like this. And I'm not going to let people treat me like this. So that's really what it comes down to, is first getting clear on like how you're thinking and how do you speak to yourself? Then how do you allow other people to treat you? And then how do you treat them? How do you treat whether it's your circle of friends, whether it's your parents, whether it's, whether you have a good relationship, bad relationship, really understanding the full picture of things and not beating yourself up, but just trying to figure out what works best for your life, because you don't always need to let these people back in. You don't always need to repair, especially, it's not me sitting here like everyone needs to have a good relationship with their dad. No, it's like, if you do, yes, but you don't need to. It's whatever is best for your mental health and your stability. And, like you said, like loving people from arm's length or not having that relationship if it's not serving you and if it's destructive. So really just getting clear on that, I would say, is the biggest part that has allowed me to really, embrace those layers and do all those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Such good points and so important. It's like, whenever you're looking at these things, it's like, am I coming at this from a healthy place? Because if I'm not coming at it from a healthy place, then it's probably not something to pursue, to be engaged with, to think, all those things. So it's so important to remember that. All right, we are down to our rapid fire. Name 5 activities that nourish you.
Meditation, running, swimming, writing, and dancing.
Awesome. All right. And 5 words on how you want to feel the next 6 months.
Empowered, beautiful, loved, caring, and passionate.
Oh, such good stuff. Paris, thank you so much. I'm so glad we had this conversation. And like I said, Field Podcast audience, all this information is going to be in the sources. You're going to be able to figure out how to find her podcast, how you can read her book, learn more about her through her Linktree links. But just thank you for your vulnerability and sharing and what you're doing in the world and making these conversations, normalizing these conversations that we need to be having so we can remove the stigmas and all live our best lives however we were created. So thank you for your willingness to do that.
Oh, thank you so much, Melissa, for having me. I've loved speaking with you and just being able to share this story and get into this topic. So I can't wait for it to come out and share it and just continue to stay connected and just continue to support one another and keep doing the work to end the stigma.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Field Podcast audience, you can, like I said, check it out on our socials. You know where to find us. You can also, if you have any questions for us that you'd like us to ask Paris or just on this topic or need some resources, you can email us at embracinglayers@gmail.com. You can DM us at embracinglayers. But like I said, check out those sources, check out the show notes. We'll have lots of information for you there. But take care and have a great week.